Lila Morgan knew the meaning of impossible long before the word took root in her heart. The dust of Wyoming Territory clung to her skirts as she stared down the barrel of Judge Thornton's ultimatum on that sweltering August afternoon in 1878. The decision is final, Miss Morgan. Your father's debts must be settled, and Mr. Harrington has generously offered marriage in exchange for clearing them. Consider yourself fortunate, fortunate. The word tasted like ashes in her mouth as she stood in the judge's office, her gloved hands clenched tight around her reticule. Behind her, Edwin Harrington, a man 30 years her senior with cold eyes and a banking empire built on others' misfortunes, smiled with the satisfaction of a predator who'd cornered his prey. My father's only been in the ground 3 weeks, Lila said, struggling to keep her voice steady. Surely there must be another way. Judge Thornton's jowls quivered as he shook his head. Your father borrowed extensively from Mr. Harrington to keep that ranch afloat. The papers are all legal. Without this arrangement, you'll lose everything by month's end. The wedding will be next Saturday, Harrington announced, as if commenting on the weather. I've already made the arrangements. They said it was already decided, she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Later, as Lila rode her mare back toward the Morgan homestead, 500 acres of struggling cattle ranch her father had poured his life into tears blurred her vision. The mountain peaks loomed in the distance, indifferent to her plight. 3 weeks a bereaved daughter, and now to be a bride to a man who viewed her as another acquisition. The ranch hands looked up as she dismounted in the yard. Most were drifting cowboys her father had given temporary work to, men who would be gone once the cattle drive ended. Only old Miguel, who'd been with them since before her mother died, would likely remain after everything changed hands. Miss Lila, Miguel approached, concern etching deeper lines into his weathered face. Bad news in town, she couldn't bring herself to say it aloud. Instead, she handed him the reins and moved toward the house, her steps heavy with resignation. That night, Lila sat on the porch, staring at the vast Wyoming sky scattered with stars. Her father had always said those stars were possibilities, each one a dream waiting to be claimed. Now they seemed to mock her with their distant freedom. The sound of hoofbeats in the darkness made her stiffen. Visitors after sundown rarely brought good news. She reached for the rifle always kept by the door, another of her father's lessons. A girl alone in the West needed to protect herself. The rider materialized from the shadows, his horse blowing hard from exertion. He pulled up short at the sight of the rifle in her hands. That's quite a welcome, the stranger said, his voice carrying a hint of amusement despite the weapon aimed at his chest. State your business, Lila called, keeping the rifle steady. The man swung down from his saddle, movements fluid despite obvious exhaustion. Name's Dawson Reed, looking for work if you've got it. In the moonlight, she could make out broad shoulders, a lean frame, and the unmistakable stance of a man comfortable with the harsh realities of frontier life. We're not hiring, she replied automatically. Ranch is changing hands soon. Dawson stepped closer into the pool of lantern light from the porch. His face came into view strong-jawed, with eyes that crinkled at the corners suggesting he smiled often, though he wasn't smiling now. Trail dust covered his clothes, and a week's worth of beard shadowed his face, but something about his direct gaze made her lower the rifle slightly. Changing hands, he asked. That why you're sitting out here looking like the world's ending? His bluntness startled her. My affairs are none of your concern, Mr. Reed. Fair enough. He nodded toward the barn. Mind if I water my horse before moving on? Been riding hard since sunrise. Common decency warred with caution. The trough is there, help yourself. While he led his horse to water, Lila watched him surreptitiously. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of years in the saddle, not young, perhaps 30, but not beaten down by life yet either. His clothes were worn but well kept, his saddle of good quality though mended in places. When he returned, he stopped at the edge of the porch. Much obliged, I'll be on my way. Something, perhaps loneliness, perhaps desperation, made her speak. There's stew left from supper. You're welcome to it before you ride on. Surprise flickered across his face. That's mighty kind. In the kitchen, she served him a bowl while he washed up at the basin. The lamplight revealed more details: a thin scar along his jawline, calloused hands, eyes a startling shade of blue beneath dark brows. "This is good," he said after the first spoonful. "Been a while since I had home cooking." "Where are you headed?" she asked, more to fill the silence than from real curiosity. "Nowhere particular, just following work." He studied her briefly. "You said the ranch is changing hands, hard times." The simple question unleashed something in her. Perhaps it was the fact that he was a stranger, that tomorrow he'd be gone and her secrets with him, but suddenly Lila found herself telling this man about her father's death, the debts, and Harrington's generous proposal. "They said it was already decided," she finished bitterly. "The judge, Mr. Harrington, even Pastor Williams, all of them acting like I should be grateful." Dawson had stopped eating, his attention fully on her. "And what do you say?" "It doesn't matter what I say. The papers are legal. The debts are real." She stared down at her hands. "I'm trapped." "When's this wedding supposed to happen?" "Saturday next. 8 days." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "What if there was another way?" Lila looked up sharply. "What do you mean, these debts? How much are we talking about?" "Nearly $2,000. He whistled low. "That's a fair sum." "My father believed Harrington when he said the railroad was coming through our land. He borrowed against the expected profits." She shook her head. "The railroad chose another route." Dawson considered this, his expression thoughtful. "What if you could pay it off another way?" "Is the ranch productive?" "We have nearly 300 head ready for market, but the nearest buyer is in Cheyenne. My father was preparing for the drive when he—" Her voice faltered. "When he died." 300 head, Dawson calculated quickly. "At current prices, that could fetch enough to cover the debt and then some." Hope flickered briefly before reality extinguished it. "It doesn't matter. I can't get them to market alone, and I can't hire a crew. That's why Harrington knows he has me cornered." Dawson set down his spoon. "What if I could help you get those cattle to Cheyenne?" She stared at him incredulously. "You, a stranger, why would you do that?" "For a fair percentage," he answered pragmatically, "and because I've never much liked men who back women into corners." "You can't drive 300 cattle to Cheyenne alone either." "No," he agreed, "but I know men who can, good men who'd work for a share of the profits." Suspicion crept in. "This sounds too convenient, Mr. Reed. A stranger rides in just when I need saving." He laughed, the sound genuine and warm. "I'm no savior, Miss Morgan, just a man who recognizes an opportunity. You need those cattle driven to market, I need work, simple as that. And these men you know, where are they?" 2 days' ride from here, a ranch where I worked last season." "They'd be willing if the money's right." Lila studied him, searching for signs of deception. "How do I know I can trust you?" "You don't," he said simply, "but it seems to me you don't have many options. You can trust Harrington, who's already shown his character, or take a chance on making your own way." The truth of his words stung. She stood, pacing the small kitchen. "Even if I agreed, Harrington would never allow it. He's not a man who accepts being thwarted." "Then we don't tell him." Dawson leaned forward. "Listen, we gather the men, round up the cattle, and start the drive before anyone realizes what's happening. By the time Harrington figures it out, we'll be halfway to Cheyenne." "That's your plan, run, not running, taking what's rightfully yours to market." "There's no law against that." She thought of Harrington's cold eyes, of the trap closing around her. "He'll come after us." "Probably," Dawson agreed. "But a cattle drive is hard to stop once it's moving, and hard to find in open country if you know what you're doing." Lila stared at him, this stranger offering a sliver of hope where there had been none. "Why are you really doing this?" Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of old pain quickly masked. "Let's just say I understand what it means to have choices taken away. No one deserves that." Dawn broke over the eastern horizon as Lila finished packing provisions. She'd barely slept, her mind racing between hope and fear. Dawson had departed hours earlier, promising to return with men within 3 days if she agreed to his plan. She had agreed. What choice did she have? A desperate gamble with a stranger seemed preferable to certain misery with Harrington. Miguel found her in the barn, saddling her horse. "Miss Lila," he said, concern evident. Where are you going so early? She hesitated, then decided truth was necessary, at least partially. I need your help, Miguel, but what I'm about to tell you must remain between us. His weathered face grew serious as she outlined her plan. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. Your father would be proud, he finally said. He never wanted you to marry that snake Harrington. Relief washed through her. You'll help. This has been my home for 20 years. I will not see it taken by a man like that. He gestured to the cattle grazing in the distance. We should begin moving them closer to the north pasture. It will make gathering them easier when your cowboys arrive. Thank you, she impulsively hugged the old man. I need to ride into town today. There are things we'll need for the drive. Be careful. Harrington has eyes everywhere. In Sweetwater, Lila moved with deliberate casualness, purchasing supplies while avoiding direct questions about her plans. She was examining preserved foods when a shadow fell across the mercantile counter. Miss Morgan, what a pleasant surprise. Edwin Harrington's voice chilled her. She turned, forcing a polite smile. Mr. Harrington. He stood too close, his expensive suit immaculate despite the dusty street outside. I was just on my way to call on you. There are wedding details to discuss. How thoughtful, she managed, but I'm quite busy today. His eyes narrowed slightly. Busy with what, may I ask? Ranch matters. There's still a business to run until our arrangement is finalized. Indeed, he glanced at her purchases. Though I'm not sure why you're bothering with such quantities. Once we're married, we'll be residing in town. I've already arranged to sell most of the livestock. Anger flared hot in her chest. Without consulting me, that ranch has been in my family for 20 years and has been failing for at least 5 of them, he countered smoothly. Really, Lila, you should be grateful. I'm saving you from your father's folly. The shopkeeper pretended not to listen, but his careful movements betrayed his attention to their conversation. I should finish my errands, she said stiffly. Good day, Mr. Harrington. His hand caught her arm as she moved to pass. Saturday, Lila. I expect a blushing bride, not this. Resistance. His voice dropped. Remember your position. She pulled free, heart hammering. I haven't forgotten anything, sir. Outside, she leaned against the building, struggling to calm herself. The encounter confirmed what she already knew: there would be no mercy, no compromise from Harrington. She had chosen her path. For 3 days, she and Miguel worked from dawn until dusk, moving cattle, checking equipment, and preparing for the drive without arousing suspicion from the few remaining hands. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, as the sun began its descent, Lila spotted riders approaching from the north, 5 figures silhouetted against the sky. Dawson rode at their head, his posture as straight as when he'd left. Relief flooded her. He had kept his word. The men he'd brought were a varied lot. 2 brothers named Taylor with identical red beards, a wiry Mexican called Vargas, a massive, silent man introduced only as Blue, and a youngster barely out of his teens named Jenkins. These men worked with me last season, Dawson explained as they dismounted in the yard. They're the best hands I know for a drive like this. Lila studied their weathered faces. I can offer each of you 10% of what we make above the debt. If all goes well, that should be a fair sum. And if it doesn't go well, asked the elder Taylor brother. Then none of us gets paid, she answered honestly, but you'll have my gratitude and whatever hospitality I can provide. The men exchanged looks. Good enough for me, Taylor decided. Been a while since I had a real adventure. Vargas grinned. Besides, Dawson says this Harrington fellow needs taking down a peg. I'm always up for that. Only then did Lila realize what Dawson had done. He hadn't just found capable hands. He'd found men with their own reasons to help. Men who understood what it meant to stand against power. That night, they finalized their plans around the kitchen table. They would leave at first light, driving the cattle north and east toward Cheyenne, taking a less traveled route to avoid Harrington's notice for as long as possible. It's about 12 days to Cheyenne at a good pace, Dawson explained, tracing the route on a worn map. We'll have to cross the North Platte here, but the water should be low enough this time of year. What about Harrington? Lila asked. Once he realizes what we've done. He'll send men after us, Dawson acknowledged. But finding a moving herd in open country isn't easy, especially if we leave minimal trail. And if they do find us? Miguel's question hung in the air. Dawson's expression hardened. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, but if it does. He looked at each man in turn. We protect Miss Morgan and the herd. Understood, they nodded solemnly. That night, as the men bedded down in the bunkhouse, Lila sat alone on the porch, anxiety and determination warring within her. The sound of boots on wood announced Dawson's approach. Couldn't sleep? He asked, settling beside her. Too much to think about. Having second thoughts, she shook her head. No, just realizing how much is at stake. This isn't just about avoiding marriage to Harrington. It's about everything my father built. Dawson was quiet for a moment. Tell me about him. The request surprised her, but she found herself describing her father, his dreams for the ranch, his kindness, his stubbornness that sometimes led to poor decisions. He sounds like a good man, Dawson said when she finished. He was, flawed but good. She glanced at him. What about your family? A shadow crossed his face. Not much to tell. My mother died when I was young. My father was not a kind man. I left home at 16, been making my own way since. The simplicity of his statement couldn't hide the pain beneath it. I'm sorry, he shrugged. It was a long time ago. Is that why you're helping me? Because you understand what it's like to be trapped. His eyes met hers, startlingly direct. Partly. And partly because when I rode up and saw you standing there with that rifle, looking like you'd take on the world alone if you had to. Well, that's the kind of courage worth backing. The compliment warmed her unexpectedly. I'm not sure it's courage, desperation, maybe. Sometimes they look the same. He stood. We should both get some rest. Dawn comes early. Morning arrived with a soft golden light and a cool breeze that promised heat later. The men moved with quiet efficiency, saddling horses and checking equipment. Miguel had prepared a hearty breakfast, and they ate quickly. Conversation minimal as the reality of what they were undertaking settled over them. Lila changed into her riding clothes split skirts that had scandalized the town when her father first ordered them for her from a catalog, a sturdy blouse and a wide-brimmed hat to protect against the sun. When she emerged from the house, Dawson gave her an appraising look. You've done this before, he observed. My father believed a woman should know how to work alongside men. She pulled on her gloves. I've been on cattle drives since I was 16. Something like respect flickered in his eyes. That'll make things easier. They rode out as the sun crested the eastern hills. Miguel and the Taylor brothers bringing up the rear of the herd, Vargas and Jenkins on the flanks, while Dawson, Blue, and Lila led the way. 300 head of cattle moved with surprising docility, perhaps sensing the confidence of their handlers. As the ranch buildings disappeared behind them, Lila felt a curious mixture of terror and exhilaration. For better or worse, she had chosen action over resignation. The die was cast. The first day passed without incident, the cattle settling into a rhythm that carried them steadily northward. They made camp that evening by a small stream, the herd grazing contentedly in a natural basin. Jenkins, despite his youth, proved to be an excellent cook, preparing a hearty stew over the campfire. As they ate, the initial reserve between them began to thaw. How'd you end up working cattle? Lila asked Vargas, who sat cross-legged beside the fire, his dark eyes reflecting the flames. He grinned, revealing a missing tooth. My father ran a small ranch in New Mexico Territory, learned everything from him before Apache raids took our land. His expression grew somber, been drifting north ever since following the work. The Taylors are third-generation cowboys, Dawson added. Their grandfather drove cattle up from Texas after the war, the elder Taylor nodded. Been in our blood so long we probably moo in our sleep. Laughter rippled around the fire. Even Blue cracked a small smile. What about you, Blue? Lila ventured. How'd you get that name? The big man looked uncomfortable with the attention, but answered in a surprisingly soft voice. Got caught in a blizzard years back. When they found me, my skin was blue as the sky. Name stuck. As night deepened, they established watches, each taking shifts to guard the herd. Lila insisted on taking her turn despite Dawson's initial reluctance. I won't be treated differently, she told him firmly. I'm part of this crew. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. Fair enough, you'll take the midnight shift with me. When her watch came, the night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the vast dome of the sky. She found Dawson already awake, sipping coffee by the small fire they maintained away from the sleeping men. Quiet night, he remarked, offering her a cup. She accepted gratefully, the warmth seeping into her hands. How far have we come today? About 15 miles. Good progress. He looked toward the herd, dark shapes against the darker landscape. We'll hit rougher country tomorrow, but nothing the cattle can't handle. They fell into comfortable silence, broken only by the occasional lowing of a restless steer or the call of a night bird. You think Harrington knows yet? She eventually asked. Dawson considered. Hard to say, depends on whether anyone from town noticed the preparations. But even if he suspects something, he probably doesn't know we've already left. What made you so sure your friends would join us? He smiled slightly. They're good men who appreciate a worthy cause, and none of them are strangers to standing against the odds. And you. What makes a man risk so much for someone he just met? Dawson's gaze shifted to the distance. I told you before I understand what it means to have choices taken away. There's more to it than that, she pressed gently. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, 5 years ago, I worked for a man named Harrington in Colorado. Different Harrington, same type. He owned the largest ranch in the county, controlled the bank, the marshal, everything. His voice grew tight. My sister worked in his house. When she refused his advances, he had her arrested on false charges. Theft, he claimed. Lila's heart contracted. What happened? She died in that jail. Fever swept through and they didn't bother with a doctor for prisoners. His hands tightened around his cup. By the time I returned from a drive and learned what happened, it was too late. Harrington was untouchable. I'm so sorry, she whispered. He shook his head as if dispelling the memories. So when you told me your situation, let's just say it felt like a chance to right a wrong I couldn't fix before. The rawness of his pain touched something in her. Without thinking, she reached out, placing her hand over his. Thank you for telling me. He looked surprised at the contact but didn't pull away. For a moment they sat in silence, connected by shared understanding of injustice and loss. The moment broke when a steer bellowed in the distance, followed by the restless movement of others. Dawson was on his feet instantly, alert. Something spooked them, he said, reaching for his rifle. They moved quickly toward the herd, Lila following his lead. In the moonlight, they could see cattle shifting nervously, but no obvious threat. Could be wolves, Dawson murmured, or maybe just a shadow that startled them. They circled the herd slowly, speaking in low, calming tones until the cattle settled again. By then, Blue had awakened for his watch and joined them. All quiet, he asked. Now it is, Dawson replied. Keep a sharp eye out, though. As they walked back to camp, Lila found herself studying Dawson's profile in the moonlight. The man who'd ridden into her yard 3 days ago had been a stranger. Now, she felt as if she'd glimpsed something essential about him, a core of principle beneath the pragmatic exterior. You should get some rest, he told her as they reached the fire. Tomorrow will be another long day, she nodded, suddenly aware of her exhaustion. Good night, Dawson. Good night, Lila. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something about the way it sounded in his voice followed her into dreams. The next 3 days established a rhythm to their journey. Rise before dawn, breakfast over a quick fire, then long hours in the saddle as they guided the herd through increasingly rugged terrain. The cattle moved well, fattened on summer grass and handled by experienced hands. On the 4th day, as they made camp by a small tributary of the North Platte, Jenkins rode in from his scouting position with news. Riders, he reported, breathless from his gallop. Coming from the south, 4 of them moving fast, Dawson's expression hardened. Harrington's men. Can't say for sure, but they're following our trail. The group exchanged glances. We knew this might happen, Dawson said. Question is, what do we do about it? We could split up, suggested the younger Taylor. Some of us take the herd on while others lead them away. Too risky, Dawson shook his head. We need everyone to manage these cattle through the terrain ahead. Then we stand and face them, Blue said simply, his hand moving to the pistol at his hip. No, Lila's voice was firm. I won't have bloodshed over this. These are my cattle, legally mine to sell. We're breaking no laws. Harrington might not see it that way, Vargas pointed out. Then we make him see it, she insisted. Or at least slow his men down without violence. Dawson studied her, then nodded slowly. There's a narrow canyon about 2 miles ahead, perfect place for an ambush or a delay. An hour later, Dawson, Vargas, and Lila waited among the rocks above the canyon entrance, while the others continued with the herd. The plan was simple: create an obstacle that would force their pursuers to waste precious time. Here they come, Vargas whispered, pointing to dust rising in the distance. 4 riders appeared, moving at a steady pace. As they drew closer, Lila recognized the lead man, Tom Prescott, Harrington's foreman. The others were hired guns she'd seen around town. Ready? Dawson asked, his hand on the rope they'd rigged. She nodded, heart pounding. The riders entered the canyon, their pace slowing as they navigated the rocky ground. When they reached the narrowest point, Dawson pulled the rope. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Rocks cascaded down both sides of the canyon, creating a barrier that blocked the path and sent the horses rearing in panic. None of the men were hit, but they were effectively trapped between rock walls with a substantial obstacle before them. What the hell? Prescott shouted, fighting to control his spooked horse. Dawson stepped into view on the ledge above them. That's far enough, gentlemen. The men looked up, hands moving to their weapons. I wouldn't, Dawson warned. We have the high ground and better cover. Prescott's face contorted with anger. Reed, should have known you were behind this. Harrington's offering a reward for the return of his cattle and his bride. They're not his cattle, Lila called, stepping forward, and I'm certainly not his bride. Shock registered on Prescott's face. Miss Morgan, what do you think you're doing? Taking my cattle to market to pay my debts legally, she answered steadily. Tell Mr. Harrington he'll have his money when we return. He doesn't want money, Prescott spat. He wants what was promised. You made a deal. Under duress, she countered. No court would uphold it. You think that matters out here? One of the other men laughed harshly. Harrington owns half the territory. There ain't no law but his in these parts. That's where you're wrong, Dawson said coldly. There's always law for those willing to stand up for it. Prescott studied the barrier of rocks, clearly calculating how long it would take to clear. This won't stop us, you know that. No, Dawson agreed, but it'll slow you down. By the time you get through, we'll be miles ahead. And the next obstacle might not be so gentle. Harrington won't forget this, Prescott warned. He'll hunt you all down. Give him a message from me, Lila said, drawing herself up. Tell him I said it may have been already decided, but not by me. They left the men cursing behind the rockfall, riding hard to catch up with the herd. When they rejoined the others, the Taylor brothers grinned at their success. That should buy us at least half a day, the elder observed, or more, Vargas added. That was a mighty impressive rock slide. But Dawson remained serious. They'll be more careful now and angrier. We need to make good time while we can. That night, as they made camp, the mood was more subdued. The confrontation had made the danger of their situation real in a way it hadn't been before. What happens when we reach Cheyenne? Jenkins asked as they sat around the fire. Harrington could still cause trouble there. Cheyenne's different, Dawson replied. Bigger town, real law. If we can get there with the cattle and sell them, it'll be harder for him to interfere. And if he tries anyway? Miguel's question hung in the air. Dawson's gaze met Lila's across the flames. Then we deal with that when it comes. Later, as the others slept, Lila found Dawson standing watch at the edge of camp. The weight of responsibility was evident in the set of his shoulders. You should rest, she said, coming to stand beside him, soon. He didn't look at her, his attention on the darkened landscape. You're worried, he sighed. Prescott and his men won't give up easily, and there's rougher country ahead, more chances for things to go wrong. Do you regret helping me? She asked quietly. Now he did turn, surprise evident in his expression. No, not for a moment. The conviction in his voice warmed her, even knowing what we're facing, especially knowing that. A half smile touched his lips. Some things are worth the risk, Lila. The way he said her name made something flutter in her chest. "What will you do? After Cheyenne, I mean," he shrugged. "What I've always done, find work, keep moving. You never wanted to settle somewhere, have a place of your own, once," he admitted. "A long time ago. But the wandering life gets in your blood after a while." She studied his profile, wondering about the dreams he'd abandoned. "Thank you for everything you're doing." He looked at her then, something unreadable in his eyes. "You're welcome." For a moment she thought he might say more, but he simply nodded toward the camp. "Get some sleep. I'll wake you for your watch." The next day brought them to the North Platte, swollen from recent rains in the mountains despite Dawson's prediction of low water. They stood on the bank, assessing the challenge before them. "It's higher than I expected," Dawson admitted, "but still fordable if we're careful." "The current looks strong," Lila observed, watching the water rush past. "It is. We'll need to find the right crossing point." They spent hours scouting the river, finally locating a stretch where the water widened and slowed, creating a more manageable ford. By mid-afternoon, they were ready to attempt the crossing. "Cattle are good swimmers naturally," Dawson explained as they prepared. "The trick is getting them started. Once the leaders are moving, the rest will follow." Vargas and Blue would cross first to the opposite bank, ready to guide the cattle as they emerged. The Taylors would manage the flanks, while Jenkins, Miguel, Dawson, and Lila would drive from behind. "Remember," Dawson cautioned, "stay upstream of the herd. If anything goes wrong, don't get caught between cattle and current." They moved the first group of steers toward the water's edge. The animals balked initially, sensing the danger, but with persistent pressure they finally began to enter the river. As Dawson had predicted, once the leaders were swimming, others followed more willingly. The crossing proceeded smoothly at first. 3/4 of the herd had made it to the far bank when disaster struck. A young steer, panicking mid-river, turned against the flow, causing confusion among those following. In moments, the orderly crossing became chaos as cattle struggled against current and each other. "Push them forward." Dawson shouted, riding into the water to turn the panicked animals. Lila followed without hesitation, her horse fighting the current as they worked to prevent a stampede. Water sprayed around them as thrashing hooves and bodies created a maelstrom of fear and confusion. Through the chaos, she saw Miguel's horse stumble in the deepening water, throwing the old man into the current. Without thinking, she turned toward him, urging her mount through the press of cattle. "Miguel," she called, reaching for him as he surfaced, gasping. His hand caught her outstretched arm just as the current threatened to sweep him away. With desperate strength, she pulled him toward her, struggling to maintain her seat as her horse fought the weight. "Hold on," she gasped, feeling him slipping from her grasp. Suddenly Dawson was beside them, his powerful horse plunging through the water. He caught Miguel's shirt, hauling the old man up as Lila held his arm. "I've got him," Dawson called. "Get to shore." Together they fought their way toward the bank, Miguel clinging to Dawson's saddle. Behind them, the Taylors had managed to turn the cattle back toward the crossing, restoring order to the drive. On the bank, Miguel collapsed, coughing water but otherwise unharmed. Lila dismounted shakily, adrenaline still coursing through her. "That was too close," Dawson said, his voice rough with emotion as he checked Miguel. "Thank you," the old man wheezed. "Both of you." Lila knelt beside him, relief making her voice unsteady. "Don't scare me like that again." As Miguel recovered by the fire they built, the last of the cattle made it across safely. Despite the near tragedy, they had successfully forded the river with no losses, a significant achievement that raised spirits in the camp that night. "We've come about halfway," Dawson announced as they ate. 6 more days to Cheyenne if the weather holds." "What about Prescott and his men?" Jenkins asked. "The river will slow them too," Dawson replied, "but we should assume they're still following." As the others talked, Lila noticed Dawson watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. When she approached him later to discuss the next day's route, his first words surprised her. "That was brave, what you did for Miguel." She shook her head. "He would have done the same for me, still." His eyes held hers. "Not everyone would have risked themselves like that." "I could say the same to you," she countered. "You didn't hesitate." A half smile touched his lips. "Seems we make a good team." The simple observation carried more weight than it should have. Yes, she agreed softly, we do. In the days that followed, they pushed the herd harder, aware that Prescott would be gaining ground. The terrain grew more challenging, hills that tested the cattle's endurance, narrow passes that required careful maneuvering, streams that, while not as formidable as the Platte, still presented obstacles to overcome. Through it all, Lila found herself increasingly aware of Dawson, his quiet competence, the respect he commanded from the men, the way his rare smile transformed his face. And more than once, she caught him watching her with an expression that made her wonder if his thoughts mirrored her own. On the 10th day of the drive, with Cheyenne just 2 days away, Jenkins rode in from his rear position with alarming news. "Riders," he reported. "At least 8 of them, moving fast. They'll catch us by nightfall at this rate." Dawson's expression darkened. "Harrington's not taking chances this time. 8 against 7, Blue calculated. Not good odds in open country. We need to reach the canyon before they catch us," Dawson decided. "It narrows enough that numbers won't matter as much." They pushed the cattle hard, faster than was prudent, but necessity outweighed caution. By late afternoon, they reached the mouth of the canyon, a natural formation that would funnel the herd through more easily defensible terrain. "We'll make camp here," Dawson ordered. "Establish a perimeter. If they want these cattle, they'll have to come through us." As darkness fell, they positioned themselves strategically, Blue and Vargas guarding the rear approach, the Taylors on the canyon walls where they could see in both directions, Jenkins and Miguel with the herd, while Dawson and Lila waited at the forward position. "If there's trouble," Dawson told her quietly, "stay back. These men won't hesitate to use force." "I won't hide while others fight my battles," she replied firmly. He studied her face in the fading light. "I know you won't. That's what worries me." The hours stretched as they waited, tension mounting with each passing moment. Finally, near midnight, the elder Taylor slipped down from his position. "They've made camp about a mile back," he reported. "Looks like they're waiting for daylight." "Smart," Dawson nodded. "They don't know the terrain well enough to risk a night approach. So we have until dawn," Lila concluded. "Yes," Dawson's expression was grim. "Get some rest if you can. Tomorrow will test us all." But rest proved elusive. Lila lay awake, mind racing with possibilities, none of them good. Eventually, she rose and walked to where Dawson sat by the small fire they'd allowed themselves. "Can't sleep?" he asked as she settled beside him. "Too much thinking," he nodded, understanding. "We've come too far to turn back now, I know." She stared into the flames. "I just hate that I've brought all of you into danger." "We came willingly," he reminded her. "Each man here made his choice." "And what about after?" she asked quietly. "If we make it to Cheyenne, sell the cattle, pay off Harrington, what then? He's not a man who forgives." Dawson was silent for a long moment. "Perhaps it's time to consider a fresh start, somewhere Harrington's reach doesn't extend, leave Wyoming." The prospect felt both terrifying and liberating. "Where would I go? West, maybe, Oregon Territory, California." He hesitated. "I've heard good things about the land there." Something in his tone made her look at him sharply. "Would you go too?" Their eyes met in the firelight, and what she saw in his made her breath catch. "I might," he said softly, "if I had reason to." The implication hung between them, neither quite ready to give it voice. But in that moment, Lila realized how much had changed since the night he'd ridden into her yard. How what had begun as desperation had become something else entirely. Dawn came too quickly, pale light revealing 8 riders approaching the canyon mouth. Dawson gathered everyone for final instructions. "Remember, we're in the right here," he told them. "These are Lila's cattle to sell. We don't want bloodshed if we can avoid it, and if we can't." Vargas asked practically. "Then we do what's necessary to protect ourselves and the herd." Dawson's gaze swept over them. "Take positions. Let them make the first move." As the riders drew closer, Lila recognized Prescott at their head. Beside him rode a man whose presence made her blood run cold, Edwin Harrington himself, immaculate despite days on the trail, his face set in lines of cold fury. "They've stopped just out of rifle range," Blue reported from his vantage point. They're waiting for us to show ourselves, Dawson said. Lila, you should stay back. No, she straightened her shoulders. This is my fight, I'll face them. After a moment he nodded, we'll go together. They walked forward, stopping at a point where they could be clearly seen but were still protected by the canyon walls where the Taylors waited with rifles. Morgan, Harrington's voice echoed across the distance. This ends now, you're right about that, she called back. It ends with me selling my cattle and paying what's owed, nothing more. You signed an agreement, he shouted. Your hand, your ranch, they're mine by right. A forced agreement isn't valid, she replied. I'm offering you fair payment, take it and go home. Harrington's laugh was ugly. You're in no position to dictate terms, girl. Look around you, outnumbered, cornered, with nowhere to run. She's not alone, Dawson's voice carried clearly, and we're not as cornered as you think. The famous Dawson Reed, Harrington sneered. I've heard about you, a drifter, a nobody. You think you can stand against me? I own half this territory. Not this half, Dawson replied evenly. Not today, Harrington's face darkened. Last chance, Morgan, call off your dogs and come with me now, or I'll have my men take what's mine by force. Lila felt Dawson tense beside her, ready for whatever came next, but before either could respond, a new voice entered the confrontation. That would be unwise, Mr. Harrington. From behind a ridge to their left emerged 3 riders, their badges glinting in the morning sun. The lead man, tall and grim-faced, was unmistakably a federal marshal. Marshal Davis, Harrington acknowledged, his tone guarded. This is a private matter. Threatening violence on the open range isn't private, the marshal countered, riding closer. Nor is attempting to force a woman into marriage to settle debts. Lila exchanged a stunned glance with Dawson. How had the marshal known? As if reading her thoughts, a 4th rider appeared, Miguel, who must have slipped away in the night. Your man found us at our camp downstream, Marshal Davis explained to Lila. Told us quite a story. A story of lies, Harrington snapped. This woman owes me money. The cattle she's driving are collateral for that debt. Then you'll be glad to know she's taking them to market to pay you, the marshal said dryly. My men and I will escort them the rest of the way to ensure a fair transaction. Harrington's face contorted with fury. You have no authority. Federal authority supersedes territorial claims, Davis cut him off, especially when there are allegations of coercion and threats. His hand rested meaningfully on his pistol. Now, you and your men can ride back to Sweetwater, or you can join us to Cheyenne where Miss Morgan can settle her affairs legally. Your choice. For a moment, it seemed Harrington might challenge even this, but Prescott leaned close, whispering urgently. Finally, with a look of pure hatred toward Lila and Dawson, Harrington reined his horse around. This isn't over, he promised. Not by a long shot. They watched as he and his men rode away, tension slowly draining from the canyon. Thank you, Marshal, Lila said when they had disappeared from sight. How did Miguel find you? Pure luck, the old man admitted, dismounting stiffly. I remembered the marshal was investigating cattle rustling near the river, thought he might help. Marshal Davis nodded. We've been watching Harrington for some time. Allegations of fraud, intimidation, your situation fits a pattern. Will he really come after us again? Jenkins asked anxiously. Not with federal eyes on him, Davis assured them. Men like Harrington thrive in shadows. Once exposed to light, they tend to scurry away. Relief swept through the camp as the reality of their reprieve sank in. The drive would continue to Cheyenne, but now with the protection of the law rather than under threat. That night, celebrations were subdued but genuine. The marshal and his deputies shared their fire and their food, trading stories of the changing territory. The days of men like Harrington are numbered, Davis told them. Laws coming to Wyoming, real law. In a few years, this will be a state, not a territory. Hard to imagine, the elder Taylor mused. Been wild country for so long. Change comes whether we want it or not, the marshal replied. Best to be on the right side of it. As the men talked, Lila slipped away to the edge of camp, needing a moment alone to process all that had happened. She found a flat rock overlooking the herd, settling there to watch the cattle graze peacefully in the moonlight. Footsteps announced Dawson's approach. He stood hesitantly as if unsure of his welcome. "Mind company," she smiled, patting the rock beside her. "Please." He sat, their shoulders almost touching. For a while, they simply watched the night in companionable silence. "It doesn't seem real," she finally said. "After everything, to have it end so suddenly—" "Not ended yet," he reminded her. "Still have to get to Cheyenne, sell the cattle, settle with Harrington." "But we will," she said confidently. "And then—" The unfinished sentence hung between them, and then, he prompted softly. She turned to look at him, finding his gaze already on her. "That's what I've been thinking about, what happens after Cheyenne." Something shifted in his expression, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "What do you want to happen?" "I'm not sure," she admitted. "The ranch was my father's dream, not mine. I stayed because it was home, because I had nowhere else to go." She drew a deep breath. "But now," his voice was barely above a whisper. "Now I'm thinking about Oregon," she said, heart pounding, "about fresh starts, about reasons to go west." He was very still, as if afraid any movement might shatter the moment. "Lila, unless I've misunderstood," she added quickly. "If you'd rather," his hand found hers, silencing her doubts. "You haven't misunderstood." The simple touch, warm and certain, spoke volumes. When he leaned forward, she met him halfway, their lips finding each other in a kiss that felt like both an ending and a beginning, gentle at first, then deepening with the force of feelings too long restrained. When they finally drew apart, his hand cupped her cheek, thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "I've wanted to do that since the river crossing," he confessed. She smiled, leaning into his touch. "Only since then," his laugh was soft and warm. "Maybe since you pointed that rifle at me the night we met." "Hardly the most romantic moment," she teased. "It was to me." His expression grew serious. "I saw a woman who wouldn't be conquered, who fought for what was hers. How could I not fall for that?" The word fall hung between them, its implications clear. Lila's heart seemed to expand in her chest, filled with possibilities that had seemed impossible just days before. "So, Oregon?" she asked, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "Oregon," he agreed, his smile lighting his eyes. "Or anywhere else you want to go, as long as we go together." The promise in those words, simple, direct, and utterly transformative, washed over her like a cleansing rain, washing away the fear and uncertainty of the past weeks. "Together," she echoed, sealing the word with another kiss. The final days of the drive passed without incident, the herd moving steadily toward Cheyenne under the watchful eyes of both cowboys and lawmen. When the city finally appeared on the horizon, a sprawling collection of buildings larger than any Lila had seen before, a sense of accomplishment swept through the group. At the stockyards, the cattle brought an even better price than expected, the market being favorable that week. After the marshal ensured that Harrington's debt was properly recorded as paid in full, with witnesses and documentation that would stand in any court, Lila found herself with a substantial sum remaining. "Enough to start fresh," Dawson observed as they counted the money in their hotel room. "With plenty to spare, and enough to pay the men their promised shares," she added. They earned every penny. The group gathered one last time that evening, sharing a celebratory dinner at the finest restaurant in Cheyenne. As they ate, plans were discussed, futures considered. "Blue and I are heading to Dakota Territory," Vargas announced. "Heard there's good work on the new ranches there." The Taylor brothers would return to Wyoming, but further north, away from Harrington's influence. Jenkins, youngest of them all, had been offered a position with Marshall Davis's team, his experience on the drive having impressed the lawman, and Miguel, faithful Miguel, had decided to return to Mexico, to the village of his birth. "Time to go home," he said simply. "See my grandchildren before I am too old to enjoy them." When it came their turn, Dawson looked to Lila, letting her speak their shared decision. "We're going to Oregon," she told them, unable to keep the joy from her voice. "To start something new together." No one seemed surprised. Indeed, the knowing smiles suggested they had seen what was developing long before Lila and Dawson themselves had acknowledged it. "To new beginnings," the elder Taylor proposed, raising his glass. "And to choices that are ours to make," Dawson added, his eyes finding Lila's across the table. Later, as they walked through the bustling streets of Cheyenne, arm in arm under the starlit sky, Lila felt a sense of rightness, of coming home even as they prepared to journey farther than she had ever been. "Any regrets?" Dawson asked, seeming to read her thoughts. She considered the question seriously. "About leaving the ranch, no, it was never truly mine, it was where I lived, not who I am." She looked up at him. "But I am grateful for everything that led me here, even Harrington in a strange way." "How so?" "If he hadn't tried to force my hand, I'd never have attempted the drive, never have met you." She squeezed his arm. "Sometimes the worst circumstances lead to the best outcomes." He stopped walking, turning to face her. In the lamplight, his expression was earnest, almost solemn. "Lila Morgan, I want you to know something." "What's that?" "When I rode onto your ranch that night, I was just looking for work, maybe a hot meal. I wasn't looking for—" He gestured between them. "Us. Are you saying you regret it?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. "God, no." He took her hands in his. "I'm saying it was unexpected, the best kind of unexpected, like finding a treasure you didn't know you were searching for." Relief and joy flooded through her. "That's how I feel too." His smile was tender as he lifted her hand to his lips. "Then I'd say we're the luckiest people in Wyoming Territory tonight. Soon to be the luckiest people in Oregon Territory," she corrected with a laugh. The wedding took place 3 days later, a simple ceremony performed by a local minister with their trail companions as witnesses. Lila wore a new dress of deep blue, Dawson a clean black suit that transformed him from rugged cowboy to distinguished gentleman, though the strength and character that had drawn her to him remained unchanged. As they exchanged vows, Lila thought of how differently this day might have unfolded standing beside Harrington in a loveless union born of coercion, rather than beside Dawson, in a partnership founded on mutual respect and deepening love. "I, Dawson Reed, take you, Lila Morgan, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he promised, his voice steady and sure. "To stand beside you, not above you or behind you, but with you in all things for all days to come." The words, his own addition to the traditional vows, brought tears to her eyes. "And I, Lila Morgan, take you, Dawson Reed, to be my lawfully wedded husband. To journey with you wherever life leads us, to build something lasting together, and to love you freely and fully as my own choice for all our days." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared felt like a promise of partnership, of adventure, of a future written by their own hands. The journey west began a week later, after preparations were complete, and goodbyes said to their companions of the trail. With a well-stocked wagon, strong horses, and the capital to establish themselves in their new home, they joined a small caravan heading for Oregon Territory. As Wyoming fell behind them, Lila felt not loss but anticipation. Beside her on the wagon seat, Dawson pointed out landmarks, shared stories of places he'd seen, and spoke of the land that awaited them: rich valleys, abundant water, forests teeming with game. "We'll build something good there," he promised. "Something that's ours." "We already have," she replied, leaning against his shoulder as the wagon rolled westward beneath an endless blue sky. 5 years later, Oregon Territory, 1883, the morning mist clung to the valley as Lila stepped onto the porch of their home, coffee cup in hand. Below, the river wound its silver path through their land, 300 acres of fertile soil, good pasture, and timber that had become Paradise Ranch. The name had been Dawson's idea, spoken half in jest when they first surveyed the property. "After what we went through to get here," he'd said, "this is nothing short of paradise." The jest had become truth as they built their life together. The house, substantial but not ostentatious, had grown room by room as their needs changed. The barn housed not only horses, but the beginnings of a breeding program that had already gained local recognition. Fields that had been wild when they arrived now produced wheat, corn, and vegetables that supplied their table with abundance to spare. And most precious of all, the sound of childish laughter that now drifted from inside the house, where 3-year-old Emma was undoubtedly charming her father into some indulgence before breakfast. The screen door creaked and Dawson emerged with their daughter perched on his shoulders, her small hands buried in his hair for balance. "Mama," Emma called, waving enthusiastically. "Papa says we can ride to the north pasture today. Does he now?" Lila raised an eyebrow at her husband. "And what about the preserving we were going to do? We'll be back by noon," Dawson promised, swinging Emma down to the porch floor. "Besides, she needs to learn the ranch same as any hand." Lila couldn't argue with that. From the beginning, they had agreed their children, daughter or son, would grow up knowing every aspect of the work that sustained them, just as Lila's father had taught her. "Very well," she conceded, "but breakfast first, young lady." As Emma scampered inside to her waiting meal, Dawson stepped close, pulling Lila into an embrace that still, after 5 years, made her pulse quicken. "Good morning, Mrs. Reed," he murmured against her hair. "Good morning, Mr. Reed." She tilted her face up for his kiss, sweet and familiar yet never routine. "Sleep well, always, beside you." His hand rested gently on the subtle curve of her stomach, visible only to those who knew to look. "How are you feeling?" "Well enough." She covered his hand with hers. "Though your son is an early riser like his father," pride and wonder softened Dawson's features. The new baby, due in winter, had been confirmed a boy by the midwife's experienced prediction. "He's just eager to join the family business." "Speaking of business," Lila said, "the letter from the Willamette Valley Cattlemen's Association came yesterday. They've accepted your proposal for the spring auction." "That's good news." Satisfaction colored his voice. "It'll put Paradise Ranch on the map for sure." As if it weren't already. She smiled up at him. "The Reeds of Paradise are becoming quite well known in these parts." It was true. Their innovative breeding methods, fair treatment of workers, and Dawson's natural leadership had earned them respect throughout the territory. Last year, he'd even been asked to serve on the Territorial Council, a position he'd accepted with the same sense of responsibility he brought to everything. "We've come a long way from that cattle drive," he observed, gazing out over their land. "We have." She followed his gaze, remembering the desperate woman she'd been, the drifting cowboy he'd been, and the unlikely journey that had brought them here. "Do you ever wonder what became of Harrington?" Dawson shook his head. "Not often. Last I heard, the banking panic hit him hard. Lost most of what he had." "I can't find it in me to pity him," Lila admitted. "Not after what he tried to do. No need for pity, just gratitude that we found another way." He turned to her, his expression earnest. "Do you know what day it is?" She nodded. 5 years since we met. "Since you rode into my yard looking for work and found something else entirely." "Best wrong turn I ever took," he said with a smile, "though I didn't know it at the time." "Oh," she arched an eyebrow. "When did you know?" He considered the question seriously. "I think it was when you stood in that canyon and told Harrington and his men that what was decided wasn't decided by you. That's when I knew for certain you were a woman I could love for a lifetime." The memory of that moment of fear and courage and the beginning of hope warmed her still. "And I knew when you jumped into that river without hesitation to save Miguel. When I saw that the man you were matched the man you appeared to be." From inside came the sound of Emma singing to herself, a made-up tune that drifted through the morning air. Dawson's arm tightened around Lila's waist as they listened to their daughter's voice, proof of the life they'd built together, the love they'd found against all odds. "They said it was already decided," Dawson murmured, echoing words spoken years ago. "But not by us." Lila leaned into his embrace, content in the knowledge that their story, begun in desperation but continued in choice, was still being written, day by day, in the paradise they had created together. "Not by us," she agreed softly. "Never by anyone but us." And as the sun rose higher, burning away the morning mist to reveal the full beauty of their home, they stood together on the porch of the house they had built. Looking out over the future, they had chosen a future that, against all odds and expectations, was entirely their own.